Hello Eternum and welcome to KOTT News, Eternum's #1 source for news, and this is the War Report. Breaking news from yesterday's patch notes that nobody seemed to notice about the possibilities of mounts coming to the game as part of the development roadmap. Data miners have provided KOTT news crews screenshots of this amazing discovery. We're going to talk about that more, gang, but first, let me tell you about the Double Experience Weekend. Because we're getting boomsticks! You know it, blunderbusses, baby! Returning to our top story. Will mounts be allowed in wars? Like the 6 official simulated fantasy combat events tonight, brought to you by LARPGO. Remember, if it isn't LARPGO, it's cardboard. Up first, the syndicate forces of Stronghold assail the marauders of landlords in their attempt to control the always restless shore. Newcomers Stronghold make their first official appearance on the island by making a practical attempt to take land. For landlords, the anarchy in the archipelago has never stopped, with tenant after tenant attempting adverse possession of their beachfront property. Meanwhile, the Covenant forces of Chad attack the Syndicate forces of Squirrel Scrubbers for control of First Light and its abundant spice flow. Chad forces have a strong lineage of participants and have the means to capture land on any given fight. For the Spice Lords of Squirrel Scrubbers, maintaining their control of the hyssop and spice production is their top priority. In the heavyweight matchup, the Syndicate forces of Black Wolves Company challenge the Covenant forces of Regime for their championship title and the right to rule over Everfall. Black Wolves Company is no stranger to taking land, having once captured the Monarch's Bluff. For Regime, each defense of the fort extends their own never-fall record streak. A win tonight will push it to 14. After that, the Covenant forces of Kyoto Yohai attack the Syndicate forces of Secrets for control of the bamboo forest preserves and medicinal hot springs of Ebonscale. Former Great House Kyoto Yohai returns from exile and attempt to capture their second regional territory. Secrets have had 3 days off since their last fight and are well rested from their soaks in the hot springs. Tonight's fight should be a good one. Then, the Syndicate forces of Primordius Virtue assail the marauders of the landlords for control of the fishing port town of Reekwater. Former founding Great House Primordius Virtue returns to one of its previously acquired lands in an effort to rebuild their empire. For the landlords, maintaining the island's main east-west trade routes revolves around their ability to field 50 in 3 different regions. But tonight, they only have to cover 2. In the nightcap, the Covenant forces of Milkit attempt to rob the marauders of Washed Guard of the primary financial capital of Windsward. A former Great House, Milkit forces have kept involved and made attempts when the timing was right for them, as it is tonight. Washed Guard have maintained the low taxes they declared when they seized the hamlet, making the central region as usable as possible for all. We'll have the outcomes and reactions from the citizens about the new mounts tonight at 11. Until then, this has been War Correspondent JChalant, KOTT News. Hello Eternum and welcome to KOTT News, Eternum's #1 source for news, and this is the War Report. Dynamic change in the history of Eternum last night as the champs get taken out in the final moments of the final round. KOTT news crews caught up with Black Wolves leadership in Everfall after the fight. Clearly breathing heavy, you took the champ all the way to the final moments of the final round, but in the end you were able to pull it off. Congratulations on taking Everfall. How do you feel it went out there?
I felt it went great, It's been a lot of talk recently, who the best server was, Had a lot of El Dorado is #1. You got a lot of Malad is #1. I just wanted to say Moonlight Pao, #1.
Speaking of best server, KOTT News would like to take this opportunity to welcome all the refugees from other islands. I have no doubt our story together here will make Camelot the server of record. Turning to the weather, and it's another beautiful day in Eternum all morning long, before a 15% chance of evening invasions appearing north and south. 2 submissions for tonight's simulated fantasy combat resolution brought to you by LARPGO. Remember, if it isn't LARPGO, it's cardboard. Up first, the Syndicate forces of Searing Void attack the Covenant forces of Lost Templar for control of the primary oil reserves of Weaver's Fen. Searing Void march into the peat moss-covered fields of Weaver's Fen, hoping to find some footing and secure some land. Lost Templar have only recently acquired the Fen for themselves last week, focusing on infrastructure and crafting buffs for the community. Meanwhile, the Marauders of Landlords challenge the new heavyweight champs of Black Wolves Company for their championship title and the right to rule over Everfall. Black Wolves Company is coming off their 29-minute performance last night, finding a way late to take out Regime in dramatic fashion. The Landlords are hoping to take advantage of this exhaustion and press them into making some mistakes that might result in the Landlords expanding their sovereignty. Be sure to tune in for complete coverage and reactions from the citizens tonight at 11. Until then, this has been War Correspondent JChalant, KOTT News. Hello, Eternum, and welcome to KOTT News, Eternum's #1 source for news. And this is the War Report. Dynamic change in the history of Eternum 2 nights ago, as the forces of Stronghold adversely possessed the Restless Shores. KOTT news crews were distracted in Everfall and were unable to get immediate reactions. Please comment below if you're an officer point of contact. Stronghold leadership have assigned all mission boards and begun distributing excess hide to Syndicate members. Available daily. Turning to the weather, and once again the sun shines all day long well into early evening until northern cold fronts and southern tropical swells collide, bringing a 25% chance of invasion throughout the night. 3 submissions for Simulated Fantasy Combat Resolution tonight, brought to you by LARPGO. Remember, if it isn't LARPGO, it's cardboard. Up first, the Marauders of Emerald Stand attack the Syndicate forces of Washed Millennials for control of the northernmost region of Morningdale. Emerald Stand has been systematically probing each region for weaknesses over the last 2 months, and making some progress. The Washed Millennials have successfully held the damp region of Morningdale for 2 weeks now, and despite the frequent rains, have not been flooded out. Then, the Syndicate forces of Bobby climb onto the western bluff and challenge the current monarchs of Landlords for their crown. Newcomer Bobby make their first attempt to secure land by replicating a successful adverse possession against the Landlords. For the Landlords, consolidating their armies into focusing on 2 regions will make it easier to fill remaining rosters with the biggest bruisers. Meanwhile, the Syndicate forces of Primordus Virtue assail the Marauders of Landlords for control of the fishing port town of Reekwater. Primordus Virtue exercising their right to rematch for a second time this week. Will they get the edge this time? That story again for the Landlords. Consolidating their regional control may have an impact on the density of their defensive might. In the nightcap, the Covenant forces of Hexacon challenge the Syndicate forces of Secret for control of the secondary oil reserves of Cutlass Keys. Hexacon leadership has contacted KOTT News and informed us that the former forces of Hexacon have indeed seen the spark. Secrets continue to maintain regional control over 2 regions, allowing for rapid access and bonuses for themselves. They're sure to fight to keep all that. We'll have the outcomes and reactions from the citizens tonight at 11. Until then, this has been War Correspondent JChalant, KOTT News. Hello, Eternum, and welcome to KOTT News, Eternum's #1 source for news. And this is the War Report. No change in the dynamic of Eternum last night, as all 4 great houses hold court and retain rulership in their respective regions. KOTT news crews were able to use this weekend to experiment with other techniques and become more familiar with other weapon choices. Turning to the weather, and it's another beautiful morning all day long, perfectly clear until very late at night when 1 potential invasion will occur. 2 submissions for Simulated Fantasy Combat Resolution tonight, brought to you by LARPGO. Remember, if it isn't LARPGO, it's cardboard. First up, the Syndicate forces of P-God assault the Marauders of P-Dome for control of the bear-infested forests of Brightwood. This will be P-God's 2nd official combat resolution, and it should be noted they are the specialized attack forces of Washed Millennials, who captured Morningdale 2 weeks ago. For the forces of P-Dome, formerly known as 40G Sayonara, formerly known as Doggy Go Bark, formerly known as Waiting for Update, formerly known as Krill Forgot to Pay Taxes, and many more aliases. Let's hope someone remembers to show up. Then, the Covenant forces of Lost Templar assail the Syndicate forces of Stronghold for control of the perpetually in dispute Restless Shore. The great house of Weaver's Fen, Lost Templar, stage an uprising in Restless Shore in their effort to expand their empire. Stronghold has had 3 days to get their bearings and have already learned why the salty sea mist of the archipelago is always in a state of anarchy. Be sure to tune in for complete coverage and reactions from the citizens at 11. Until then, this has been War Correspondent JChalant, KOTT News. Hello, Eternum, and welcome to KOTT News, Eternum's #1 source for news. And this is the War Report. No change in the dynamic of Eternum last night as the defending great houses hold their ground against others attempting to expand theirs. We spoke with Stronghold leadership about their plans for Restless Shore.
Well, first off, I'd like to thank our players because they're just built different, and everyone should know that. Expectations, well, we're going to keep level up the town to try and get some more business, some more commerce in here. We wanted to prove a point by coming in here and just two-man pushing the territory, and we'll happily welcome all the purples, all the support to keep pushing with us, and we look forward to more fun wars.
Turning to the weather, and after a full morning of sunshine once again until early evening, when a 20% chance of invasion may occur. 5 rosters submitted for Simulated Fantasy Combat Resolution tonight, brought to you by LARPGO. Remember, if it isn't LARPGO, it's cardboard. Up first, the Covenant forces of Sus and Company assail the Syndicate Spice Lords of Squirrel Scrubbers for control of the First Light and flow of the spice. Newcomer, Sus and Company, appear out of nowhere and claim to have been in navigation shooting rocks, which sounds totally sus to me. The Squirrel Scrubbers are totally ready to throw them out of the airlock. I mean, make them walk the plank, because nothing must stop the flow of spice. Then, the Covenant forces of Young Money assault the Marauders of Landlords for control of the fishing port town of Reekwater. Former great house of Cutlass Keys, Young Money make an attempt for Reekwater and its abundant fishing resources. The Marauders of Landlords have gone over the new rules of engagement and have prepared themselves for battle. They didn't come here to play around. Meanwhile, the Marauders of Green Grapes attack the Syndicate forces of Secrets for control of the Bamboo Forest Preserve and Medicinal Hot Springs of Ebonscale. Newcomer Green Grapes make their first official move in an effort to secure the Healing Hot Springs for future efforts. But the forces of Secrets have been working hand in hand with the citizens on improving the hamlet. They can't let a bunch of marauders ruin all that. In the main ring, the Marauders of Black Air Force challenge the Syndicate forces of Black Wolves Company for their championship title and the right to rule over Everfall. Newcomer Black Air Force seek to measure the true strength of the reigning heavyweight champs and perhaps overcome them. For the champs, their second defense of their championship belt, en route to the minimum Neverfall requirement of 5 held by the Reckoning. In the nightcap, the Syndicate forces of Unwashed Socks break in against the Marauders of Bird Mode to steal the financial capital of Windsward. Newcomer Unwashed Socks make their first attempt to move into the history books by securing the funding to empower their future ambitions. The Marauders of Bird Mode have made it clear that their only intention is to take on all comers. They are fully rested and welcome the opportunity to prove themselves. We'll have the outcomes and reactions from the citizens tonight at 11. Until then, this has been War Correspondent JChalant, KOTT News. Hello, Eternum, and welcome to KOTT News, Eternum's #1 source for news. And this is the War Report. No change in the dynamic of Eternum last night as all 5 great houses hold the line against the newcomer upstarts. KOTT news crews are still experiencing technical difficulties associated with recent patches, but we endeavor to carry on. Only one submission for Simulated Fantasy Combat Resolution tonight, brought to you by LARPGO. Remember, if it isn't LARPGO, it's cardboard. Tonight in the late time slot, the Syndicate forces of Nameless attack the Covenant forces of Lost Templar for control of the primary oil reserves of Weaver's Fen. Nameless makes its second attempt to secure land by slogging into the peat moss fields of Weaver's Fen. Lost Templar have been balancing hamlet upgrades along with fort improvements, all while attempting to expand their empire. They seem well organized for combat. Be sure to tune in for complete coverage and reactions from the citizens at 11. Until then, this has been War Correspondent JChalant, KOTT News. Hello, Eternum, and welcome to KOTT News, Eternum's #1 source for news. And this is the War Report. No change in the dynamic of Eternum last night as the great house, Lost Templar, went out in the bog of Weaver's Fen. KOTT News crews will be phoning it in today in order to prepare for opening day down at the ballpark. Turning to the weather, and the only thing more consistent than daily war reports is the sun shining all morning long, until evening tropical swells will push inland from the south, bringing invasions with them. 4 submissions for Simulated Fantasy Combat Resolution tonight, brought to you by LARPGO. Remember, if it isn't LARPGO, it's cardboard. Up first, the Covenant forces of Bankrupt engage the Syndicate forces of Washed Millennials for control of the northernmost region of Morningdale. KOTT News crews have been unable to identify how a bankrupt group of people were able to fund a war effort. Stay tuned for more. For Washed Millennials, their 4th defense of the Northern Forward Observation Post, while infrastructure and fort upgrades continue to be made. Then, the Syndicate forces of Nameless challenge the Marauders of Landlords for their crown and the right to rule over the Monarch's Bluff. Nameless returned to the bluff after being turned away 2 weeks ago. Will New Loak improve their chances? The Landlords have settled well into their position on the bluff and are prepared to defend their crown against this nameless enemy. Later, the Covenant forces of Yang Huang assail the Marauders of Landlords for control of the primary fishing port town of Reekwater. Yan Huang take advantage of the scheduling overlap to force Landlords to field 2 different teams. For Landlords, holding 2 regions has seemed almost effortless to date, but will the overlap have an impact on tonight's outcomes? In the nightcap, the Covenant forces of Young Money attack the Syndicate forces of Secret for the secondary oil reserves of Cutlass Keys. Young Money invoke their right of rematch and attempt to resecure their position as kings of Cutlass Keys. It was Secrets who took the region away from Young Money 2 weeks ago. How will they fare tonight, now that the roles are reversed? We'll have the outcomes and reactions from the citizens tonight at 11. Until then, this has been War Correspondent JChalant, KOTT News.